The Trump administration has announced we will put an end to Joe Biden's illegal student loan bailout attempts. No student loan has been referred to collection since March of 2020. That comes to an end. On May 5th, the Department of Education will resume involuntary collections for borrowers with defaulted federal student loans.
It is disgusting that people who were given the ultimate privilege in this country think that they can ride off the backs of Americans who work unbelievably hard, in fact, much harder than we do. That's just what this is. That's their
All right, guys, good Thursday to you. What a panel we have coming your way today. Batya Ungar-Sargon is here today for the first time. I'm excited to hear her take. Our good friend and former colleague Steve Cortes is going to be joining us, and he's got some hot takes on a lot of big issues. And then our old buddy, Jenn Pellegrino of the American First Policy Institute, also about to join us as well. A lot to break down what's going on. There's some stuff happening in Ukraine, the Pope's funerals this weekend. Tariffs, there's so much happening. I was hoping for a quiet post-Easter week, but I don't know what I was thinking. It's against my own better judgment. So a lot to break down. We're going to cover it all. Before I get to that, you guys know, we talk on Thursday show about the winners of the week. Usually the winner of the week every week for me is a guy named Leo Grillo. If you're a longtime watcher of the show, you know who I'm talking about. Leo Grillo is the founder of Delta Rescue. He found and rescued a Doberman along the roadside years ago, and that became a lifelong mission. It wasn't just one dog. He named the dog Delta. The Delta standard for dedication and everlasting love to animals. And what he has built now is unbelievable. If you go to deltarescue.org, you'll see what I'm talking about. It is the world's largest no-kill sanctuary, not a shelter, a sanctuary. I text and talk to Leo all the time. He loves to remind me of that fact. This is a place where abused animals, neglected, malnutritioned animals go, all sorts, dogs, cats, and horses. I think they even take snakes in. They'll do anything to help animals. And the best part is Leo does this because he loves animals. There's no big USAID or political pro subscriptions behind it. It's all funded by people like me and you. I've made a personal donation to deltarescue.org. If you can help, please go to deltarescue.org. Check out the videos of the great work they're doing, and then consider a personal contribution to Delta Rescue. Now, here's the other thing. At the top, you'll see that estate planning tip, little thing there. If you have an old 401k or stocks that you maybe can get some kind of tax benefit for after you talk to your tax professional, think about helping Leo make Delta Rescue an enduring mission. So go to deltarescue.org, see how you can contribute to help make this an enduring mission. By the way, you guys know this if you've watched. I have made on my journey to wellness, Beam Stream Powder, a critical piece to this. Sleep is at the backbone of wellness. We all know this. It didn't take a doctor to tell us all this. But when I, over the years, have been trying to get a better night's sleep, I've tried everything, melatonin, magnesium, whatever. Once I found Beam's Dream Powder, it was a total game changer. And now wherever I go, as I travel, I take a little baggie with me because I take the scoops, I put it in a bag and travel with it. And then at night, same routine. Take the scoop, put it in some water, 30, 40 seconds, and boom. The flavors are amazing, and it's got all of those natural ingredients that I've talked about. Magnesium, melatonin, reishi, apigenin, theanine, all in one amazing drink. I'm not kidding when I tell you this. I love the cinnamon cocoa. Some people like the brownie. The peppermint's pretty good too, but it doesn't matter which one you like, because once you try it, you will be like me. Fall asleep within a few minutes, stay asleep, and wake up feeling refreshed. There's a reason that 17.5 million nights sleep have been produced because professionals and athletes all over are taking Beam Stream Powder. And here's the deal. Beam is giving my listeners the ultimate Patriot discount, 40% off if you go to shopbeam.com/Spicer and use promo code Spicer. So shopbeam.com/Spicer and use promo code Spicer. It doesn't matter which flavor you choose. Trust me, I've tried them all. They're all amazing. And once you try it, you can just say thank you very much, because like me, you will have a better night's sleep. It is a great American company doing great American things. So help yourself, invest in a great American company, and get on that journey to wellness by getting better sleep with Beam. Go to shopbeam.com/Spicer, promo code Spicer. All right, I want to bring in my panel right now. Batya Ungar-Sargon, who is an author, a political commentator, and I'm going to get to this soon, but she loves to call herself MAGA Lefty. I want to know what that means. My old colleagues at Newsmax. First, my buddy Steve Cortes, the founder of League of American Workers, and then Jenn Pellegrino, my other colleague at Newsmax, who've all joined us on this new journey to independence. She's the senior director of media affairs and spokesperson at that amazing institution, the America First Policy Institute. Good to see you all. Batya, welcome to the show. By the way, I just got to tell you, not in advance of this, but I bought your book a while back and started reading it because my buddy Dan Turrentine on the morning meeting has it. I've seen so many people talk about it, and I have just loved what you've written. People know I love the media and the critique of it in particular. And your take on, it's called Bad News, how woke media is undermining democracy, has been so cool to see somebody else take on and hold accountable the media in a way that I just love. So first, thanks for joining us. And let me just, you use this tagline, MAGA Lefty. What does that mean?
Thank you so much for having me and for all those kind words. It's so sweet. And I'm such a huge fan of yours. I watch you every single morning. So it's really a privilege to be here with you and your viewers and this amazing panel. What is the MAGA left? It's funny because I used to think it was like, party of one. But since I said that on the Bill Maher show, I have gotten comments and private messages from thousands of Americans who have said to me, that's what I am. And what it is somebody who looks at Donald Trump and looks at his agenda and looks at what the GOP was before he arrived, which was socially conservative, pretty much pro-war, American exceptionalism, foreign interventions, and pro-free trade, trickle-down economics, the party of country club and so forth. And Trump basically took an axe to all three of those things. He's not really a conservative. He is a moderate. He is anti-war with every fiber of his being, and he really hates free trade because he thinks that it turned America into the patsies of the world. When I look at that agenda, socially moderate, anti-war, and pro-worker, protectionist, to me, that is the FDR agenda. And that is what I am. That's what the left was until it lost its way because it abandoned the working class to cater to the elites the way they did in the media. That's what that book is about. How the reason our media is terrible is not necessarily because it's so left, although it is. It's left and it's woke because the people who are in the media, the journalists have all gone to these very fancy private universities. And as a result of that, they have really bad woke ideas.
This plays well into a post that Steve Cortes, you put out this week. Let me just read. It says, national polling affirms that more Americans now regard the Republicans as the party of workers over the Democrats. When put into historical perspective, this shift is truly monumental. So I want you to explain what you mean by that. Sure. And secondly, do you agree with Batya that Trump isn't as conservative as someone like me thinks he is? Or is it just that she's looking at it through her lens as someone who supports the working men and women?
Sure. Well, on that first point, because I think this is incredible. And by the way, even CNN, part of why I wrote that article about, the GOP is now the party of workers. Part of why I wrote that is, number one, because I do a lot of polling, which shows that. But number two, even CNN, believe it or not, was willing to concede and to some degree promote this point. Harry Enton there, who I think is one of the few people on that network who tells the truth and who tries to deal in facts and reality and numbers, he pointed out just how astounding this is compared to history. So by my polling, for example, when we ask what is the party of workers in my most recent poll, and I've now gotten 3 polls in a row where the answer is the Republicans, this time it was 42-40 in favor of Republicans. So it's a narrow lead. But if you put that in historical perspective, generally the Democrats had about a +20 lead on that question and related questions for decades. I mean, they just owned that political territory. And they've lost all of that lead, and it is now essentially a tie or slightly in favor of Republicans. By the way, when you drill down and ask working class people, which one is the party of workers? For example, in my poll, we asked people who don't have a college degree. The lead for Republicans goes to +14. So it's 47-33 among high school graduates. Which one is the party of workers? So the working class themselves absolutely overwhelmingly believe it's Republicans. Now, it's because of the transformation of the party, right? It is no longer the country club, big business, corporate boardroom Republican Party. And that transformation, by the way, didn't come easily. It's not like the decision makers of the Republican Party just handed the keys over to the MAGA movement. No, we had to take it, right, through a lot of aggressive action, a lot of agitation, and a lot of smart activism. And of course, with the indisputable leadership of Donald Trump. What I would say regarding Batya's analysis, and I think she's just doing amazing work here. I think this is a nuanced take. And what I would say is Donald Trump, though, absolutely is a conservative. He's not the inheritor of FDR. He's much more channeling Pat Buchanan. Now, both are populists, right? Populists of the left and populists of the right. But the difference with that second kind of populism of the right, the Pat Buchanan variety, is that it is socially conservative. And as proof of that, Donald Trump was the most pro-life president in all of American history, the architect of overturning Roe v. Wade. So to me, when you combine populist economics, populist nationalist economics, protectionism, when you combine that with cultural conservatism, what you end up with is America First and Donald Trump.
Well, and that's the point, Jenn Pellegrino, that I was going to label this. What I've always tried to put my finger on is it may not fit into the bucket of traditional conservatism. It may not fit in the traditional bucket of, but what I do think is that it's America first. And with respect to trade, and Batya brought this up, I, as a guy who bought into free trade, I was the assistant U.S. trade rep. So I, plead guilty on that front. What I finally realized is that for the longest time, we had been told through conservative doctrine that like the free trade meant you guys get access to our market and we don't get it to yours. And that's the definition of free trade. What Donald Trump finally said is, okay, the Soviet Union has collapsed and free trade is, we don't need the same soft power tool that we did back in the day. And free trade is, hey, if you're a friend of mine, it means that you give me the same access that I give you. Fair is fair, right? We're a bigger market. You should still be happy with that. I mean, that's the funny part about this. And the label of America First, which is what your organization is all about, is truly, to me, what this is about. It's not a bucket of defining it as conservative or liberal. It's more about just like common sense America First policies.
Yeah, and you know what, to Steve's point, it took time, a lot of fighting, a lot of energy, a lot of hard work to get to where we are now. I will say when you look over the last decade, I think Republicans, where we started pre-Donald Trump, we needed an answer to Obama. We didn't have that. We were left with Romney and we had weakness, a soft Republican Party. We didn't have that leader. And along came Donald Trump. And he obviously appealed to middle America, those workers that Batya speaks about that felt like they were forgotten. But it took time, and I think it took to us going through President Biden and then coming to this second Trump administration now to where more people have come on board. They've listened to the messaging. The Trump administration, his team, they've obviously really sharpened his messaging and been able to appeal to more Americans. And I think to that point, again, it does become the America First movement where it's not about so much about parties as it is something that more people can get behind and say, yeah, I feel left behind too, whether I was a Democrat, independent, you name it. And I feel like President Trump's messaging is speaking to me.
Jenn, I think too, you mentioned that it's such an important point though too, that it's not about party, that these America First, these new MAGA populists, they don't necessarily consider themselves Republicans. That can be a strength and a weakness for the cause. And as an example of the weakness, the recent election in Wisconsin, right? A state which Donald Trump won last November. Critical state, generally the closest of all the swing states. Donald Trump has now won it 2 out of 3 elections. But then we fast forward to April 1st in a state Supreme Court race there, and they elect their justices in Wisconsin. And the Republicans lost, and really lost rather soundly. And one of the biggest reasons was that those Trump voters who don't consider themselves Republicans didn't then turn out. So there are challenges to this, in other words, that these people, these new voters, these populists who now identify, they'll say, yes, the GOP is the party of workers because of Donald Trump, but they aren't hardcore party partisans. They aren't really Republicans yet. They believe in America First. They believe in MAGA. They believe in Trump. So there's a challenge there of how do we then transition that, and how do we leverage that into something where Republicans win predictably? And that certainly has not been accomplished yet.
I want to get into this weekend in a minute because there's a White House Correspondents' Dinner. I want to get to this at the end, and I want to talk about the Pope because I sort of have a different and interesting angle. Steve, I know you tweeted about this, but before I do that, because one of the things that I thought was interesting this week is what's going on in education. And the Trump administration came out, led by Linda McMahon, basically saying, hey, we're actually going to start collecting on these loans. And I was fascinated by this. That's basically saying, hey, as of May 5th, the party's over. We're actually going to make you pay for them. There's a clip that that Caroline Levitt had from the podium, and I want to play that for you to show you guys what she had to say about this loan program. Take a look.
In other news, the Trump administration has announced we will put an end to Joe Biden's illegal student loan bailout attempts. No student loan has been referred to collection since March of 2020. That comes to an end. On May 5th, the Department of Education will resume involuntary collections for borrowers with defaulted federal student loans. The student loan portfolio controlled by the federal government is nearly $1.6 trillion, but fewer than 4 out of 10 borrowers are in repayment. This is unsustainable, unfair, and a huge liability for American taxpayers. Debt cannot be wiped away. It just ends up getting transferred to others. So why should Americans who didn't go to college or went to college and responsibly paid back their loans pay for the student loans of other Americans? The Trump administration will never force taxpayers to pay student loan debts that don't belong to them. Student loan borrowers need clarity, and we're finally giving it to them. Borrowers will now be clearly expected to repay their loans, and those who default on their loan obligations will face involuntary collections. The government can and will collect defaulted federal student loan debt by withholding money from borrowers' tax refunds, federal pensions, and even their wages. America is $36 trillion in debt. We must get our fiscal house in order and restore common sense to our country. If you take out a loan, you have to pay it back. It's very simple.
Batya, I think that is very simple, right? To me, that makes sense. Where do you think that falls in your MAGA Lefty world?
Straight into my veins, Sean. This, like the tariffs, is Trump waging class warfare on the elites on behalf of the working class. The average college grad will make $1.2 million more over the course of their career than a person who only has a high school degree. It is disgusting that people who were given the ultimate privilege in this country think that they can ride off the backs of Americans who work unbelievably hard, in fact, much harder than they do. And I think that's just what this is. Like the Democrats, that's their base, is the top 20%. That's why the Democrats keep picking on every issue. You know, we're sitting here tearing out our hair, like trying to understand, why do the Democrats keep picking the 20% on 2080 issues? It's because that is their base, is these over-credentialed college elites who think that they should have everything coming to them and have unbelievable contempt for working class people, for conservatives, for religious people, for people who don't agree with them on these like crazy cockamamie views that they get in their fancy universities. And this is the chickens coming home to roost. This is class warfare on behalf of the forgotten men and women of this country, not the poor who the Democrats love, the working class. And this is a really important distinction. The Democrats cannot see the difference between working class people and poor people, because to them, anybody who makes less than them is poor, because they have become the party of the rich. And that is where the Republicans' focus absolutely needs to be right now. Working people, people who work really hard and can no longer afford the American dream. And I think that's what President Trump is really, really focused on.
Jenn, there's 2 points to this. One is, to me, the common sense nature that you take a loan out, you pay it back. Linda McMahon said, and we played the clip yesterday on the show, it's not forgiveness, which is what Biden did. This gaslighting thought that it's forgiving a loan. Someone's paying for that, right? And secondly, and I'll be interested in Steve's take on this, but like, we're missing the bigger point, in my opinion, which is that college costing $80,000, $85,000, $90,000 is insane. The idea that you're basically getting people to get a degree in gender studies so that they'll be in debt for the rest of their lives, whether or not they pay off the loan or not, frankly, is insane. Like, why are we encouraging people to go get a degree in something that they're never going to make enough money to pay off? Like, if you want to be a rocket scientist, an engineer, a doctor, okay, I get that maybe, but going to give them a degree in Latin or English lit or general studies that they will never pay back, to me, is kind of malpractice.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a great point, Sean. And I heard Linda McMahon in an interview this week saying, listen, we're at $1.7 trillion in student loan debt. Caroline Levitt saying, we haven't seen repayment since 2020. We're looking at 5 years now. Listen, you go to college, you make that choice. You're an adult saying, I'm going to take out this loan. Well, you better be accountable and pay it back. Again, it doesn't just go away. It's not just forgiveness, as you said. This goes on the backs of taxpayers, and this should be paid back. And I agree with you, Sean. College is wildly expensive these days. I think back to when I graduated some time ago. It's been a little over a decade here, and it was expensive then. And now it's gotten so much worse. It's unbelievable what so many are paying for these useless degrees right now. They're getting people nowhere. And again, it's falling on the backs of the American workers, many of whom said, I didn't choose to go to college. I went an alternate path. Or those that paid off their student loans and are now saying, wait, you're forgiving the student loans of others and I paid mine off. What about me?
Right.
It's not fair.
Steve, I mean, there are two issues here, right? There's a fairness issue for people who paid off, but then there's also the bigger, broader issue, which is why are we accepting an environment that says it's okay to charge a kid $80,000, $90,000 for a liberal arts education?
Yeah. Well, and by the way, not just on the utility of that education, but also the fact that most American universities, let's just be honest about it, are indoctrination centers, okay? They are trying to instill an aggressive, secular humanist worldview into young Americans. Now, people have the freedom, if they're paying for it, to choose to be subjected to that indoctrination. But when we as a country are massively subsidizing it, that's a very, very different story. First, on the fairness point, let me just say personally, I went to one of these fancy schools, took on a lot of debt, paid it all throughout my 20s, which was a very long time ago. Was it worth it? To be honest, probably not. But the point is, I did it. Made a contract, fulfilled the contract, paid it off. Is it unfair to me and millions like me to have debt wiped away and then us pay for the debt? Of course it's unfair. It's patently unfair. But also, looking at the economics of it, and I think everybody kind of suggested this in their comments, the point is college wouldn't be so expensive if it weren't so subsidized by the federal government. If you look, even before Joe Biden, okay, we had about 40 years of essentially no inflation in America, roughly from 1980 to 2020. Even during that time frame of really tame inflation, college costs absolutely soared because it was so heavily subsidized by the federal government. And a lot of people, I think, now are waking up, and I think Donald Trump's doing a real favor to the American people, that it's not just the state schools. As a matter of fact, in most ways, the private schools are more subsidized than the public schools are. The Ivy League gets more public money than any other group of schools in America. So this isn't just your state university, your flagship school that's getting public money. You are invested, whether you like it or not, in the entirety of this system. And is the system producing results that are commensurate with the investment? I think the honest answer for anyone is no. It's producing a lot of people who don't have skills to get a good job. It's producing a lot of people, unfortunately, young people, who have largely been fooled into believing that America is an evil country, that we were founded on malicious principles, that white men are evil. I could go on and on. So is it on many levels, is it worth the investment? I think the answer is absolutely not. But should people who borrowed be forced to pay back? Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's any question. I want to make a little bit of a hard turn here because it didn't get a lot of attention this week, but JD Vance was traveling around the world. He was in Italy and then to India, but he made a comment about Ukraine that I thought was fascinating because Ukraine hasn't gotten the attention right now, the war in Ukraine, because of all the other issues, tariffs, etc. But I want to play you what he said about the negotiations that are currently taking place in our role in them as a government. So take a listen to what JD said, and then I want to get your take on this.
We've issued a very explicit proposal to both the Russians and the Ukrainians, and it's time for them to either say yes or for the United States to walk away from this process. We have engaged in an extraordinary amount of diplomacy, of on-the-ground work. We've really tried to understand things from the perspective of both the Ukrainians and the Russians. What do Ukrainians care the most about? What do the Russians care the most about? And I think that we've put together a very fair proposal. We're going to see if the Europeans, the Russians, and the Ukrainians are ultimately able to get this thing over the finish line. Again, I feel pretty optimistic about it. I think everybody has been negotiating in good faith, but it's now time, I think, to take, if not the final step, one of the final steps, which is at a broad level, the parties saying, we're going to stop the killing, we're going to freeze the territorial lines at some level close to where they are today, and we're going to actually put in place the kind of long-term diplomatic settlement that hopefully will lead to long-term peace.
So, Batya, let me just start with you. there's a lot of folks in the media, since this is what you wrote about, who are trying to portray this as JD Vance is saying we're about to just walk away from this. I think personally it's more of a negotiation tactic. We need the Europeans to get their back up and realize you guys can't solve this problem. Only Donald Trump can solve the problem here. And so either you come to the table responsibly or we'll leave this for you. And we also need Putin to take it seriously. We need Zelensky to have a realistic view of what's possible. What do you think about where we stand in terms of the U.S. role when it comes to ending the war in Ukraine?
It's a really great question. You were talking in the morning meeting yesterday about how nobody wants Putin to win, but there was a status quo in place when the war began. And that status quo was Crimea was part of Russia. Ukraine was not part of NATO. And the Donbass at the time there was a civil war happening there. We forget about this, but it had been declared an independent republic of Donetsk and Luhansk at the time by the militants there. They were Russian backed, but they were Ukrainians, and they were fighting after the Maidan. They were fighting the Zelensky government, which it became. They were fighting Kiev. They were fighting the West. So there was a civil war going on. Now, in the course of the war, Putin has now annexed the Donbass area. But that was the status quo. The Donbass was not officially part of Ukraine at the time. Ukraine was not part of NATO, and Crimea was part of Russia. Now, we don't have to like that to be able to see that at some point, that is going to have to be how this ends. That is how the bloodshed is going to end. And it's this isn't a moral question. This is a question of you have someone like Putin who has nuclear weapons and a limitless supply of cannon fodder because he does not fundamentally believe in the sanctity of human life. And you have Ukraine, which is much smaller, which is only still standing because of our support. And the American people have really had it with this. They don't think that we're getting much bang for our buck here. So that's the reality. And, we have to accept that as a nation. And I think the fact that the president is being undermined here domestically by Democrats and also internationally by the Europeans who keep acting like they can float this, which they can't, is really muddying the waters here. It's time to end the bloodshed. I think the president feels that in a very keen sense. 1 million young men are dead and it has to end.
Yeah, Jenn, I feel like that to Batya's point, there's a reality of how this thing ends. No one thinks that Ukraine is going to end up with Crimea, regardless of how bad Putin is and how he acted. I mean, I just don't see that being a realistic outcome. And yet I do also believe that, and this isn't like some propaganda. I don't think that anybody but Trump can actually get peace there. And that if we don't put some pressure on everybody to literally come together and say, it's either now or never, at some point, it's just going to keep going. The Europeans don't have the strength, the fortitude to get a deal. Putin doesn't respect them. But we've got to be realistic. And I know that sometimes that's not how the media wants to portray stuff, but I just don't feel like if Trump doesn't get them to the table, nobody will.
I completely agree with that. And obviously, you've seen efforts by this administration, as the vice president said, to communicate with both sides here, to have an understanding of where they're both coming from. We obviously had Zelensky in the White House. We remember how that meeting went, how disrespectful he was. So many Americans saw that moment and had great pride with how our president and vice president handled it and handled that disrespect in the Oval Office. And I think, the fatigue with this war, as far as Americans are concerned, started a long time ago, and it continues. And you get to a point where you say, okay, how much more can we do? And again, President Trump, we've seen how he's delivered peace through strength in the past. I think he would be the one to help the two countries get to that point. But, it's how much longer is that going to take before you either back off or get stronger?
And, Jenn, I think to that point, it's refreshing to me that J.D. Vance is willing to say there's only so much the United States can do, right? There's only so much we can do economically and in terms of negotiations. And by the way, I want to really praise J.D. Vance. I had the honor of working for him in 2022 in his successful Senate campaign. And in that Republican primary, the defining issue of that primary back in 2022, because the war was brand new in Ukraine, was intervention in Ukraine, because he and his Republican opponents agreed on most issues, but disagreed on this one because J.D. Vance rightly believed in an America First foreign policy of realism and restraint. And he said that as a Marine, as somebody who had been deployed to a war zone, he said, America has to stop intervening all over the world. There's too much bloodshed. There's too much treasure expended. And he had a very Trumpian view of foreign policy against constant war making. It's interesting now that Trump twice has inherited these massive wars. In the first term, he inherited the American wars overseas, the wars of adventurism, which he thankfully wound down very aggressively and started no new wars, unlike his predecessor. Now he inherits this war, and in many ways it is a proxy American war in Ukraine, and he's trying his best to end this one. The point is, it's not in our national interest. The Russians and Ukrainians have hated each other for centuries. This is an ancient ethnic regional rivalry. But secondly, even if we believed we have an American interest, folks, we are borrowing this money to send over to corrupt Zelensky. We don't have the money. If we are going to borrow a mountain of money, hundreds of billions of dollars, we better believe that this is fully in our national interest and that we have a real partner on the other side, on the receiving end of that money. And we do not have that by any sense in Zelensky. He is an absolute corrupt autocrat. Is he as bad as Putin? No, but he's still bad. Let's not put a white hat on him. Not a good guy. Point is, this is not our fight. We're doing our best to be negotiators and peacemakers here. But at some point, if the parties won't negotiate in good faith, America needs to wash his hands in this situation.
All right. I want to get to this weekend because there's some big stuff happening between the Pope's funeral and the White House Correspondents' Dinner Association. But before that, there was a moment this weekend that I think I got to call out because I think it was hysterical. Elizabeth Warren is on this podcast. She gets asked about Biden, Jenn. And I know that this is something that you flagged earlier, but it was unbelievable. She goes on this podcast and she gets asked about Joe Biden's mental decline because she was at the forefront. She got asked, do you regret saying President Biden had a mental acuity? He had sharpness to him. She used the word sharpness. And she said it up till July of last year. And then her response was, I said what I believe to be true. Jenn, this is like this continued gaslighting. First, we got a Maryland man who's a family dude who just happened to beat the crap out of his wife and came into the country illegally and belonged to a gang. And then Elizabeth Warren talking about Biden. And the thing that I couldn't believe that they actually held her accountable to this. And I mean, Batya wrote her whole book about the media. This is a podcaster, so he's not a legacy guy. But the idea that finally someone's holding her accountable to saying, hey, in July of last year, you said Biden had sharpness to him. And she's like, yeah, I guess that's what I believed at the time.
Yeah, and it's amazing. Of course, there she's on a podcast well within what I'm sure she felt was her comfort zone, thinking she wouldn't have any questions of that nature. She clearly wasn't prepared to handle it. And his backpedaling seems very uncomfortable in this whole exchange with the podcast host. And again, it's just the Democrats, they continue to lie to the American people. I wish that these questions would have been asked of politicians during the Biden administration. We never saw that happen. It was only coming from the right. They always, kept lying to us. Everything's fine. Even from the podium at the White House, we often heard that. Nothing to see here. And then, of course, all of the facts come out, as we were saying all along. But then the left finally acknowledges it to an extent. But to your point, Sean, again, I think that the American people are craving transparency, whether you agree with President Trump, like everything he's doing or not. I think a lot of people can at least value the transparency that we're seeing in this administration, that we're seeing among so many on the right, that you're not getting from the left. And, listen, they're in a tough spot right now. They have no true leadership. They're scrambling as we head barreling into the midterms next year. Who knows where things are going to go for them, but they need to get their messaging clear right now and come clean with the American people because it's going to be another bloodbath for them come the next election.
Jenn, you make an important point there about how you wish the questions had been asked, right? They were obvious questions. Hey, is the president okay? Is he cognitively okay? Those questions were not asked by the corrupt corporate media. But I really want to single out here Jake Tapper because I think it's the most galling of all the bad examples in the media. The fact that he was one of the foremost promoters of the lie that Biden was okay, and he has now written a book detailing how Biden wasn't okay. And he has the gall to put this book out into the public sphere as if he had nothing to do with the promotion of the lie in the first place. I mean, in a way, I admire the chutzpah, but wow, talk about hypocrisy.
The book is called Original Sin. Batya. It's like, dude, do you not have any self-awareness? You're literally calling a book original sin. You're the dude who had the apple
Yeah.
offering it up, saying, "Hey, bite this." You know, I to Steve's point, like I don't even know chutzpah goes far enough because I was like, how do you write a book about original sin when you're the guy that literally defended the sin?
It's so funny. You guys know that meme of the guy in the hot dog costume, and there's a hot dog car that's like run into a building, and he's standing there surrounded by people in the hot dog costume being like, we're all looking for the guy who did this, right? Like it's that meme come to life, and it's so amazing. You know what it really reveals is not just the hypocrisy, but the contempt they have for their viewers and for the rest of the country, because they have no shame. They don't even feel that they should be ashamed of what they did because they don't consider their viewers and certainly people who disagree with them to be fully human. I mean, right? That's what it is, right? A normal person would be ashamed to be caught having done something that horrible. And that's how, like, I keep asking myself, why are these journalists not ashamed after the election to write a book being like, I knew it back then. I had this interview, like I knew back then, but I'm going to make money off it now. And I didn't warn the nation before we almost had a senile president, right? And it's a shamelessness that's bred by utter contempt for the American people.
Well, you know, it's like they feel they create the news, and whatever way the wind blows, whatever they decide, that's what the American people should believe, because there are so many people, unfortunately, that buy into what the mainstream media tells them. And I thought Natalie Winters said it really well recently. There was an article on MAGA media in Politico about the MAGA media in the briefing room. And she said, I think the reason essentially they don't like us is that we're like a mirror to them. We're reflective of the fact that they are in decline right now. And that's really where they are, is, you know, again, they've been lying to the American people. Now you've got a White House that is allowing that transparency into the briefing room in a way we've never seen before. And we're seeing them start to melt down in the legacy media.
And just on that, sorry, go ahead, John.
No. I call it the weatherman, right? I mean, you wake up one day and they go, today it's going to be raining and and the sun comes out. And then the next day they get out there and just like, there's never an accountability of, wow, you got it wrong yesterday. And you're now you just keep going. You never have to be accountable for what you said the day before.
Right. And the thing that you just brought up, Jen, is really important, because what they're doing there is they are acting like they're upset about the new MAGA media on expertise grounds, right? Like we're the experts and they have no expertise, right? No, you are partisans. And yeah, the MAGA media is pretty much on the side of MAGA. That's why they're MAGA media. They like what the president is doing. But you, the traditional media, are no less on a side. You're just on the other side. And they dress up their partisanship as expertise. And I think that's what President Trump has really revealed. We don't have a political divide. We have a class divide. People get fancy degrees and then they act like things they do in order to get power for their political side are somehow objective truth or somehow of a higher order of intelligence, when it's really nonsense. They use their expertise and they use their credentials to sell out the American people. And then that's the whole thing you need to know. Like, that's why the whole conversation around tariffs is being driven by people who are pretending to be experts, but are actually partisans.
That's right. All right. I want to get to this weekend because obviously this is the White House Correspondents' Dinner, but the Pope's funeral's this weekend. And the first thing I want to ask you guys, because I was off on this. I didn't think that President Trump would go. I thought J.D. Vance, as the Catholic in the party, would go, and that Trump just didn't like some of the comments that he had made in the past, that the Pope had made. I was somewhat shocked, but I don't know. In retrospect, I think I made a snap decision that didn't think about Trump wanting to be on the world stage that he did. So just first and foremost, because I want to get to this, Steve, you had some polling on this stuff that I thought was interesting. But first and foremost, did any of you guys disagree with my snap judgment? Did any of you think he was definitely going?
You know, I did. And here's why I thought he was definitely going. I think two things. Number one, he realizes how important it is for the world, right? I mean, if you look at the amount of global media attention, most of it from non-Catholics, the Pope, whether you are an adherent of Catholicism or even Christianity or not, is a global leader that is singularly important in a lot of ways. So I thought that. But then also, and this might sound more crass, but frankly, looking at American politics, Catholics were the determinative voting factor for Donald Trump last November. In 2020, he tied Joe Biden among
Well,
Catholics.
this is the point that you made, Steve. You
Yeah.
you tweeted this out. For decades, Catholics formed an absolute foundation of the Democrats. Now Catholics are fleeing the party.
Yes. So Catholics have completely flipped, largely because many Catholics are working class. So there's a lot of overlap here between working class Americans and Catholics. But Catholics have been for decades the absolute foundation of the Democrat Party. From the days of in the northern cities, you had these urban political machines, to Al Smith, to, of course, John F. Kennedy, all the way really until the 1970s and somebody like Tip O'Neill. Those kinds of leaders and elected officials, they have no place in the Democratic Party of today. The Democratic Party cannot tolerate a Tip O'Neill working class advocate in the party today. And so they have become largely Republican and certainly America first. And in this most recent election, so Trump tied among Catholics nationwide in 2020. He was plus 11, according to AP Votecast, this time nationwide. So the reason he won the popular vote is Catholics. And the reason he won the 3 northern states, the northern swing states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, all of which are heavily Catholic, Catholics were the deciding factor in all of those states. He won Catholics by the teens in those places. So I think it's also smart politics. It's not just good diplomacy and statesmanship, but I think it's also smart politics for President Trump to go and pay his respects, irregardless, by the way, of what you think about Pope Francis. The papacy, of course, is much bigger than just Francis, and I think it's proper and fitting for Trump to be going.
Jen, were you surprised at all?
You know, it's funny. I saw the headline, the news alert, before I had a chance to really think about that and wonder whether he was going to attend. I was really reading more into the statements coming out from the vice president, who had met with the Pope, obviously, the day before, President Trump, who put out a very short statement. Neither statement coming from the two of them was, overly, positive toward the Pope. It was just obviously positive toward the people who loved him, sending condolences and so forth. So you could read a lot into that, obviously. You think back to the clashes that the Pope had with President Trump on immigration, his 2015 speech to Congress, obviously in support of immigrants coming to our country. So I think there was a lot there that, listen, President Trump doesn't have to prove anything to anybody anymore. So you could obviously make an argument for him not going to this, but I think to Steve's point, it is nice to see that he's doing it. I think it means a lot to Catholics in this country. And again, I think we look, a lot of Catholics looking to see who this next Pope will be, if it'll be more aligned with conservative, traditional Catholics, unlike this progressive Pope Francis was.
Batya, what about you? I was just, again, in retrospect, I was like, I agree with Steve's point. Like, I felt like Trump knew how big of a moment it was and wasn't going to miss it. But I think I was very short-sighted in my initial snap judgment.
It's so funny because when I was listening to Steve talk, I was like, gosh, that's so cynical. Like, I think Trump really, look, Sean, you know him much better. But to me, he seems like a person who, like, when it comes to moments like these that have a kind of spiritual significance, he does often, I think, rise to the moment. He does, call upon better angels. And, so to me, the idea that he's looking at polling or thinking about the world stage, I think, like, it just seems very in his nature that when somebody who represented a great movement like Catholicism, passes on, that the thing to do as a world leader is to show up. But Sean, what is it like for you in your faith and your faith community to have the Pope attack somebody who you think is doing something? I mean, to me, the immigration fight has a spiritual component to it, certainly, of elevating our fellow Americans and restoring their dignity. But what was that experience like for you?
Look, it's very difficult if you're a Catholic, if you have Catholic guilt, because the Pope is the head of the church, and if you believe in apostolic succession, it's the last person you want to be attacking or disagreeing with is the Pope, if you want to get in that door to heaven. Because I don't think that Peter is going to welcome you too kindly if you've been saying, hey, your successor, you didn't. So look, there were times I disagreed with how the Pope approached immigration, because I don't think Donald Trump looks at it in an evil way. He looks at it as a rule of law, and that you can't just have open doors. The Vatican has gates. The Vatican has locks. Like the idea that somehow you can just show up anywhere. So policy-wise, I disagreed with the Pope in how he discussed immigration in particular. I do think the Pope did a lot of good things for the Catholic Church. He was very welcoming into the faith, and there's a lot at the particular time. But I think he misread President Trump's motives. That being said, it is that moment in the show when we go through on Thursdays and do our winners and losers. Batya, you're new. Who do you have as a winner and a loser this week?
My winner is Scott Bessent. I think that he really did an amazing job this week. His speech at the IMF was moving and powerful and reframing what Trump is trying to pull off in a way that I think the elites can possibly, hopefully hear it rather than keep trying to destroy and undermine. And my loser is Elon Musk. I think he's outstayed his welcome. I think it's time for him to move on. I think that, Sean, you were right that, a lot of what looks like it's about Iran vis-a-vis Hegseth is actually about Elon. I know other departments where he's been behind the scenes trying to get contracts in ways that I consider to be very inappropriate. So I'm going to be happy to see the back.
I'll just Steve Cortes, we don't have a lot of time left. Who do you have as a winner and a loser?
My winner is the Catholic Church. In an age of increasing secularism, the church is showing how relevant it still is with all of the coverage of this death of Pope Francis. My loser is Larry David for his op-ed in the New York Times, quote, "My Dinner with Adolf." I think he's a great comedian. I can't believe that he is retreading this ludicrous lie that Trump is Hitler and that the New York Times published.
Oh, wow. The funny thing is I had not seen that. I will go see it. And I because that to me, Al Gore said some stupid stuff this week too. And I just, as someone who has stepped in it before on this, I've always said, stop with the Hitler stuff. It's just, that is reserved for the worst of the worst. Jenn Pellegrino, winner and loser.
So loser, easy one. It's the Democrats right now, Senator Van Hollen, other Democrats who are running to the support of illegal migrants, these criminals that have come into our country. It's disgusting, especially when you see people like Patty Morin at the White House and networks tuning away from her and obviously not supporting the angel moms and families that have been destroyed by this Biden's border crisis. Winner this week, I don't have a super strong one, but I would say MAGA media continues to be. You could call them MAGA media, but listen, it's really the new media. Yeah. It's the new landscape that we're seeing right now that, again, this administration's done a great job of elevating. And I love to see it. I love to see that there's more out there than just the establishment.
Every week when I go last, I try to put a few in because I always get them taken. Jenn Pellegrino, I didn't even have another winner. I just wrote MAGA media. So you and I are on the same page on that. On loser, I also had Chris Van Hollen as one of my choices and student loan folks who haven't had to pay. But then I really went with my one is the White House Correspondents' Dinner. I think this is the last year that it exists in the iteration that it has. This is the beginning of the really rapidly declining end for that dinner. So
good riddance.
Good riddance. Yeah, I don't think the world's going to be a worse place because that dinner goes away. And I'm glad to see Steve Bannon and Substack and all these other organizations hosting alternative events because this is a great thing. Guys, thanks for kicking off our Thursday evening with us together. I appreciate it. Batya, thanks for joining us. Congrats on a great book. Steve, always love the polling and your social media commentary. And then obviously, Jenn, you guys and everything you're doing at America First Policy Institute. Always love what you got out there. Guys, thanks for being with us. We'll be here tomorrow to wrap up the week and kick off the weekend with all things relevant. Go to SeanSpicer.com to sign up for the weekly newsletter. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Thanks for being with us. Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.